Well, we've arrived at a subject so core to how I think we make Enneagram wisdom practical that I'm compelled to be extra hammy about it in this introduction. That subject is inquiry, or inquiry if you insist. The practice developed by A.H. Almas to question our experience in a way that will cause it to unfold. This, I am learning, is quite the skill. Almas was in that core of students taught the Enneagram in the 1970s by Claudio Naranjo, the psychiatrist who integrated modern psychological understandings with Oscar Ichazo's discoveries of Enneatypes. Almas went on to investigate and then discover that presence, or unfixated consciousness, doesn't always look the same, and that in delineating aspects of being, we can come to have more contact with them. For the spiritual seeker, the logos of the diamond approach offers unparalleled descriptions of the non-dual experience, an approach to accessing being that is appealingly realistic and achievable. All that is required of the student is to recognise the ways these qualities of being are already present in ordinary everyday experience, and learn to identify and later inquire into our estrangement from them. Far from being an enemy to defeat, the ego is our ally in this endeavour. Our Enneagram type patterns offer the entry points, the sacred portals to our truer natures, provided we bring inquiry to them. Inquiry is the body of the diamond approach. It's central, although not only practice, most comprehensively described in Almas's book, Space Cruiser Inquiry. The Diamond Approach teacher Dominic Liber's book, Diving in the Inner Ocean, takes on the same task, but from a different vantage point. How fitting these teaching metaphors are from Almas and Enneagram 5, and Dominic, who I learned has type 4. Dominic's book is a practical and friendly guide to this simple transformational practice that doesn't require the same, I want to say, obstinance as reading an Almas book. I love and I'm deeply touched by what this simply written book does. Dominic offers a free monthly online forum dedicated to exploring, refining and discussing the practice of inquiry. You can participate in these without being a member of the Ridwan School. Dom is teaching a course, a dive-in inquiry course, starting on the day this episode goes live, the 13th of September, which runs weekly on Tuesday evenings British summertime for the next 6 weeks. And it's only £100. You can find more information about this at domliber.com and dive-in.life, or through the links in the episode notes. Enjoy this transmission from the wonderfully warm and clarifying Dominic Liber. Dominic, thank you so much again for taking the time for this. I've really been looking forward to our conversation.
Hi, Rez. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here with you.
I wanted to start by letting you know what I loved about your book, Diving in the Inner Ocean, An Introduction to Personal Transformation Through Diamond Inquiry. I say inquiry, by the way, like the American way.
Yeah. I've been in the Ridwan School long enough. I also do.
And then, just for background, I was telling you before we record just now that I've been a member of the Ridwan School for around a year, with a small amount of exposure to the teachings prior to that. And before I reached out to you, and what led me to was reading Hameed's book, A.H. Almas's book, Space Cruiser Inquiry. So the book did clarify it for me, and I wish I read it earlier, actually, the why behind inquiry, because I hadn't really appreciated the extent to which that was still a question for me, even through the teaching weekends. Why are we exploring the subjective experience in this way? My spiritual sort of practices prior to then have been more about towards transcending, not paying such close attention to it. So reading that book was really eye-opening. And then I'd remembered that you'd written a book too on inquiry, a totally different book from Almas's, much more accessible from what I could see. And then between these two books, I've become really clear on what I'm doing when I practice inquiry. And dare I say, even maybe developing a bit of a taste for it now and the beginnings of a love. And your book especially has instilled in me, I would say, more of a confidence that if I keep practicing, the inner landscape will become more differentiated. Because again, I think I was feeling some doubt about whether that would actually happen. And also yours is a book that I can feel confident directing other people to, which is not necessarily the case for Almas's books, which I love, but are very dense. You know, I'm having to read each page twice.
You touched there on a number of points that were so kind of central to really what I hope to accomplish with it, which is really to take this practice that is such an amazing practice and so little known, and to sort of put it out there in a way that can be accessible so people can discover it and they can learn how to do it effectively. It really is such a profoundly transformational practice. It is very few people sort of are aware of the possibility or know how to engage it in an effective way. The idea was really to find a way to make a little book almost like Inquiry for Dummies that just really goes to the basics and says, you know, what do? You sit down, you talk, you write, you know, you get in touch with your experience and all the other steps that we'll no doubt talk about, so that there is a nice, simple, practical, comprehensible, easy to understand way of learning it. Lovely to hear that that's some of what you found.
Definitely. You've shared a little there, I guess, about what inspired you, but can you say more about, was this born out of a struggle you had when you first started to practice inquiry, Dom, or not really?
It really came forward as I started teaching, really. So I started teaching around, first working with students in the early sort of 2010s, 2013, and working fully as a teacher in 2015. And I was working with a student for about a year, and we had these sessions, and in the sessions we inquire, right? As a teacher, you're asking questions and the person's exploring their experience. And she said to me after a year, she said, you know, I come to these sessions, the most amazing things happen in the sessions, but I still have absolutely no idea what we're doing. And I thought, this is really a thing. I've been doing a lousy job, actually, in really orienting this person to what it is that we're actually doing. And then I began to see it everywhere and to recognize just how few people actually understood the basic mechanics of the practice. And so that really led me to sit down and, you know, I discussed the idea with Hameed and Karen, and they were very involved in the whole development of the book. And to really look at how to break it down into very practical steps so that somebody could really understand what it is that we're doing. I think what you said, though, you pointed to something else that I've really kind of come to understand even afterwards, is still even more fundamentally why inquire. Like, why should we do this? Why do we get in touch? And I talk a bit about it in the book and in the inquiry courses that I teach. You know, we see people, they begin to inquire, they get in touch with themselves in a way that feels so personal and meaningful to them. And then that answers the question for them right there. They're like, oh my God, this is just so meaningful and significant, and it feels so valuable. Why would, you know, of course I want to do this. But another way to answer that question is, you know, these days we're finding we know more and more about, say, our bodies, right? So, you know, if you're going to go and do exercise or you're looking after your health, you got to know something about your muscles or your circulatory system or your diet and how that affects your body and the need for nutrients. And so there's a whole lot that you understand about your body. And that knowledge is really important for being able to live fully and effectively and to make the most of your health. And in a certain way, inquiry is like learning to understand the insides of your psyche in the same way. We actually need to understand our psyche because there's a whole lot going on in there that, you know, until we start to look at it, is we mostly don't have a clue about. So the question is, how do we, you know, get in touch with that and find out about it, get to know ourselves and understand what it is that makes us tick and how we work? Really, inquiry, there is nothing that does that with the power of inquiry.
Did Hameed invent inquiry?
Well, I think, inquiry is as old, probably as old as human beings. So Hameed certainly did not invent inquiry. I think what Hameed's particular thing was one way he describes it is he said it's Socrates plus Freud. It kind of brings the Socratic sort of interrogation of your experience plus the psychological insight into it. Combining those two, that was kind of a fresh combination. I mean, there are two things that define inquiry, right? The first is that you get in touch with the immediacy of your experience, with what's actually happening. What is it that's really going on, not theoretically, but from what you're actually directly experiencing? What are you feeling, sensing? What are you in touch with in an immediate way? And then you explore it. You just find out about it. You just get curious about it. In a way, it's as simple as that. In that process, we know that we encounter psychological stuff, various structures in our consciousness, instincts and presence, all kinds of things that we can talk about. The basic thing of it is just to get in touch with the immediacy and explore it. What Hameed did that is in a way kind of unique was bringing, he was a theoretical physicist. So it's kind of bringing that very scientific kind of investigation just to see what is this, but applying it to the very palpable immediacy of experience. Yeah. And it's those two together that kind of define it. Any of the spiritual practices, when you think about it, very similar to what you said a little earlier, many spiritual practices are aiming either to get to a particular state, like the boundlessness or the love or the compassion, or to kind of transcend our more ordinary experience. Mm-hmm. And it's not that there's anything wrong with any of that. Those are all totally valid ways to go. But with inquiry, with the diamond approach, we're getting in touch with our experience in the same way, but then actually really just being interested in it. What's here? What is it? What's going on and what's making it happen? And that allows the consciousness and the experience to open up in a whole new way. So as a spiritual kind of technology or approach, it was pretty revolutionary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, let's look at how this is different from self-observation, which is what, as your regular Enneagram student, that's what we're poised to do and that's what we're taught to do. Here are your patterns. Once you've successfully identified your type, here are your patterns. Now observe them. And that's kind of it.
Right. Yeah. So, and people, it's such a beautiful part of the process. When we first encounter the Enneagram, it kind of holds up a mirror to us, basically. It reveals these patterns, these things going on inside us that probably until that point, we either had very little idea about, or we had no idea that they were sort of more universal kind of patterns. We just think, well, that's just how I am. And so there can be that really wonderful stage of where you're just learning so much. And of course, that's a very thrilling and exciting part of the journey, and scary, right? Scary to see all these patterns. And, we can have all sorts of feelings about that, but it's a very rich part of the process. And we then kind of go about our lives. And as you say, we can sort of be observing more and more how these things played out. But what you'll find at a certain point is, as you say, that only takes you so far. The next stage that people get engaged in then is obviously trying to manage some of the difficult aspects of the patterns. So, where you get sort of reactivity or big kinds of reactions, okay, I need to slow down there, or I either want to avoid that situation or manage it in some way, right? So you have an awareness of the pattern, and that begins to give you some choices about how you manage it and sort of strategize around it. And again, this is only going to take us so far, right? Because it all sort of takes your personality and your patterns as a given, and it says, well, this is who you are, this is how you are, and now you can, do your best to manage it. So with inquiry, we make, in a sense, quite a radical shift. So by now, you're noticing your patterns. We then invite you to do something further, which is not just to observe them, but of course, to be actually feeling them, feeling the feelings that come, to actually get in touch with them, and even to sense your body more and more finely, right? So that you're actually sensing yourself, you're in touch with your experience in a very immediate way. So like if one of your patterns, you get angry about something, you get angry about it, you can notice that you get angry, you can feel the anger, right? And then you can begin to sense the anger, like in your body, like you want to tense your fists or you get hot or something like that. You can try and avoid situations that make you angry. Common thing people do, right? Just try and avoid them. That's my pattern. I know that that's what I do. Let me just not go there. Inquiry invites a very different turn. And the turn is towards the experience to go, this is really interesting. What is it that's making this happen? What is this anger, right? What's it actually about? And so instead of taking the pattern and explaining it away, which is how some people end up using the Enneagram, and I don't think they plan to do it that way, but it's where we can end up. We go, well, this is my type. I'm doing that because I'm a type 1 or I'm a type 4 or I'm a type whatever, and that's just what we do. But when we do that, we kind of shut down the exploration. The invitation of inquiry is to hold it very lightly. Okay, I know this is one of my patterns. I have this kind of reaction. Let me just get really curious about it. Don't assume that I know everything about it, and I let myself feel into it and sense into it and be curious, what is making this happen within my psyche, within my soul? That's really the beginning of the inquiry.
And we should probably say here that in the school, in the Ridwan school, they don't teach the students the Enneagram. So a lot of people in there practicing inquiry and learning inquiry are doing it from that, I think, arguably more open space than I was when I arrived at the Ridwan school, full of my Enneagram knowledge, thinking, I know what I get up to with my head center and my heart center. But no, I've had to open up again, reopen again. And I'm not saying the Enneagram hasn't been useful. It has.
So it's tremendously useful. And what you point to is it's just one of those risks. I mean, you'll find the same thing with the teaching of the diamond approach. You can't avoid it. You're going to hear a whole lot of stuff about whatever, compassion, right? And then you think, okay, well, that's how compassion goes. I mean, it's just what our mind does with the knowledge. What we have to learn to do is to hold the knowledge, just hold it lightly. Ultimately, the thing with inquiry is, and this is really central to how I put it out in the book, right? So in the book, in Diving in the Inner Ocean, I talk very little about the specific things you might encounter, right? When you go diving, what will you find? It doesn't matter. What I've tried to do is to teach the method that you can apply to anything that you find. And so from that point of view, you could say, well, it doesn't matter what your enneatype is. If you are having some kind of pattern, it doesn't matter if it's because of your enneatype or because of anything else. Just get in touch with it and get curious about it. That's all you need to do, whatever it is. And that is what will open it up. And that's true. That said, I really do think the Enneagram knowledge is very useful. So, I use the analogy of diving in the inner ocean. So like your whole inner world is like an inner ocean, all your thoughts, and feelings, and presence and experience. And in a way, different enneatypes are like different ocean ecosystems, Like some people are coral reefs, like the 7s are coral reefs, or the 3s maybe. Some people are deep, dark caves, like the 4s hidden away there. So there's kelp forests, there's Arctic, there's all kinds of different terrain. With any place you could find yourself in the sea, we can just say, we'll dive in and explore. And that's true. And it might be useful to know something about a kelp forest or something about a coral reef so that you can explore it in a more sort of effective way, and you have some idea of what you can find. That idea of what you can find is not meant to take away from the immediacy and the freshness of the exploration. So you still go diving in a fresh, open way with what you find. But it's useful to have some ideas of like, this might be something that I come across. And that's what the knowledge of the Enneagram can really give you.
The trick really is not to let Enneagram knowledge close down inquiry, to using it as a diving board for inquiry.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I remember it happened to me once in a session with a teacher, and I was feeling something, and they said, "Well, what's that happened?" And I said, "Well, oh, that's my type."
Yeah.
Well, like, okay, but as you're feeling it, like, how come, what's there, right? What is it that, if you don't just write it off as your type, but you feel into the experience and you sort of see what it is, that's what will invite it to keep opening and transforming.
Keep opening it. That's a good thing for me to remember as well. So is there any more that you'd like to say about what inquiry is and what it isn't, Dom? So it isn't self-observation. That much is clear.
It includes self-observation.
Yeah.
The self-observation is part of it, but it is much more than self-observation. So self-observation means being aware of yourself as you're going about your experience. This means observing it, being in touch with it, feeling it. Most importantly, not just taking it at face value, not just going, and people do it with all schools of knowledge. They go, oh, it's my enneatype. Oh, it's my trauma. Oh, it's my amygdala. Oh, it's my this. It could be. All of that might be true. But the point with inquiry is to come into the immediacy of the experience, whatever it is. I'm feeling this love. Okay. So what's that like? How is it to feel the love? What do you sense? What are you feeling? What is it you love? Right? You just want to find out about yourself and find out what's true for you. That's worth highlighting as well. That really the key guiding thing in the inquiry always is just the truth. What is it that's true for you? So when I say find out about your experience, it's not that you have to make yourself get to some explanation or fit it into somebody's box or fit it into a theory, any of that. It's all irrelevant. I mean, it can be helpful, but it's not the primary orientation. The main thing is, as you're just sitting with yourself, being with yourself and feeling like, what can you say? What's actually, if you're just being honest, what pops out? That's the kind of truth we're interested in here. Like, are you sad? You go, yeah, well, actually, I am sad. Okay, all right, what are you sad about? So it's that kind of an unfolding that will just reveal what's actually going on for you. And then we sort of follow that. We stay with that thread. And just like following a little fish as it goes swimming around the reef, we kind of follow the thread of that truth to find out where it takes us.
I hope people were getting a feel for how sort of different this is to just regular self-exploration, because I really was deluded about how well I genuinely self-explored before I encountered this. Is it a discipline inquiry, or it's a practice, isn't it? But
for sure, it's a practice. I think there is a discipline to it, like with any practice. I mean, the main thing I would say, the place where I see people get most tangled up is they mix up analyzing their experience with inquiry. Right. So analyzing your experience is where in a way, you kind of mentally speculate about what's going on. Like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. While I was doing the teacher training, there was, we were doing a group with a lovely old teacher in the school, and she asked someone a question like, what are you experiencing? And he said, well, I think it's this. And this teacher was quite old. She was in her 80s at the time. And she said to him, my dear, I might be dead by the time we've gone through all the things that your mind could think it might be. So why don't you just skip that and let's see what it actually is? It was a very effective intervention. But that's really it, right? The point is, what can you really tell? What's really there? You don't need to speculate, oh, this is happening because of my history with my mother. When you feel into the experience, if it is because of that, at some point you will feel young. You'll feel a little child inside you. You'll feel like, oh my God, I suddenly feel like this little 4-year-old, like I'm not being seen and nobody's understanding me. And you very palpably get a sense, say, of that situation where your mother didn't understand you, right? It'll pop out with that kind of clarity. By staying with the actual felt immediacy of the experience, everything that you need to know will eventually get revealed. And, that's kind of what you were saying at the beginning, that at first we don't really have any idea that that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly, obviously, then don't have the trust or the confidence that it will happen. But you'll find as you practice that little by little it does.
Yeah. Actually, I want to sneak in a question that I didn't preview with you, but can you briefly describe the stages here, Dominic? Because I'm very aware that I'm in early stages of inquiry, and the inner landscape is very much like, there's not much subtlety to it. So what happens? What are the stages? And I'm asking that because it is disheartening to begin with, to turn your attentions to your sensations and just not find anything.
Yes. I think there are a couple of things that can be going on there. Yeah, where to start? One thing is that for sure it develops, right? So not to mix metaphors, but I'm going to do it anyway. Another analogy I use a lot for inquiry is it's like wine tasting. You know, your first time you ever open a bottle of wine, you're like, well, yeah, whatever, okay, all right. And, you know, if somebody was sort of blind tasting, they probably couldn't tell a white from a red, or, you know, it doesn't mean anything. But the more you consciously taste, the more you are with the experience and you let yourself have it and taste it and give yourself time to begin to notice the differences, just like any skill, in time that begins to develop. Right? You begin to be able to notice, oh, actually, this one tastes a bit more fruity, or that one tastes a bit more minerally, or these differentiations, you used the word earlier, then begin to emerge. So it's a natural process of learning. We're basically learning to look inside at something that we maybe haven't paid that much attention to until now, to notice it more and more finely. So the main thing I would say to you is just give yourself plenty of time. You know, how are you feeling? Well, I don't know how I'm feeling. I don't even know if I'm feeling anything. Okay. You let yourself just stay with that and see what happens, right? As you let yourself feel that. Learning to it is important to get comfortable with not knowing. I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know what I'm sensing. To get comfortable with the not muches. Well, I don't know, not much really. There's not much happening here. Okay, well, what's it like that there's not much happening here? Is that okay? You know, if it's not okay, how come? Like, what's not okay about it? Might be nice to just sit there and feel not much going on, right? So there's that side of it. But the other thing I think that can happen, a common mistake that happens when people first inquire is, so again, if we think about the diving analogy, right? So you go out in a boat, right? And then you jump off the boat into the water and you're just where you are. So often when we first begin to inquire, that's what it's like. Over the water, into the side, and you look around and it's like, oh, there's not much here, right? So one thing you can ask yourself then is, well, not just what am I feeling and sensing and what's on my mind in the moment, but like, hey, well, like what's really going on in my life? What are the things that are really up in my life? Well, the thing with my job, the thing with my partner, or something going on with the children, or, you know, how you feel about the politics, right? So there can be all kinds of things that when you actually just look a little more broadly at your life, the water begins to get busier. And what you might find is as you begin talking about that situation, like, well, what was going on at work? Well, this and this and this and this. At some point, you realize, oh, now I feel really happy about it, or I feel really excited about it, or I feel really angry about it, or whatever. And so the experience starts coming to life. Then you've got an entry point. You don't have to only just start in the blank water when you first tumble over the boat. And then you say, well, what's happening in my life? Nothing. I mean, I don't know for how many people that's actually true.
Yeah.
It seems very unlikely to me that if you really looked around the context of your life, you'd say, well, there's nothing going on, right?
Definitely. That was something helpful I remember from your book. That can be part of the check-in. If there's not much apparent in the moment, then we can start to look at what's going on in life.
Yeah. And to allow space for both. That sometimes it might be really interesting to stay with that. Well, I've just dived in here and it's empty water. Let me get to know that. Let me be interested in that. And sometimes, it might be, well, actually, there is this thing. And I notice habits with that, like with students have different habits with that. Some people, it's almost as if their inquiry is never really connected with their life. They're just talking about their inner process as if it was happening in a bubble, right? And some people, they only ever talk about what's going on in their life, right? So, we need to, in time, become skilled and incorporate both. Talking about your life will bring things alive in your immediate experience. And that is the food for your inquiry.
How does it feel? You already spoke to how it feels when we practice inquiry, but I've asked you this question because it doesn't always feel good to inquire.
Yes. So now you've touched on something really important. And it's back to that, which we never got to the answer of, the way that inquiry then really goes further. As we get to know our Enneatype, we also get to know the suffering in it, right? The difficulties. There are all kinds of difficulties and issues and challenges, and, that sort of come along with it, as well as actually all, various strengths and qualities that are positive that show up. And for our inquiry to become really powerful and for our journey to continue, that's really the point. For the journey to continue, we have to get interested in more than just getting rid of the difficulties, right? So the basic orientation of many people at the beginning, well, first there's just the excitement of discovery, and then there's the recognition of the difficulties and the suffering, and then it's like, well, how do I get rid of that? I just don't want to feel like that anymore. Somewhere along the line, we have to make that turn to go, I actually just want to know what's going on here. I keep having this difficulty, or this thing keeps recurring over and over. What is making that happen? Where is that coming from? And that will allow us to dive all the way down to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, the root of the issue with all of these things is a very deep root. And it takes a very deep kind of transformation to really resolve the problem all the way down to the real root. And the real root of it is that we have misunderstandings about and disconnections from who and what we are, from our nature. So why do I feel like this? Where you keep saying, well, I keep getting angry. Like, okay, so why do you keep getting angry? Why do I keep getting angry? Realize at some point I feel I'm angry because I'm in some kind of situation. I can't do anything about it. I feel like I don't have the strength to do anything about it. And then you begin to see, oh, okay. So that whole reaction about the anger actually has something to do with strength. And I'm feeling that I haven't got it. And that is beginning to take us down to a very deep root to see, oh, that's really what's making all the rest of that happen. Our inquiry will eventually take us there. It'll take us there little bit by little bit. Yeah, and that's really what's necessary to work it through. So as you say, I think what you were saying there is not a quick journey. It's not a quick fix. This is not about plasters on symptoms. No, here we're really going to go all the way to the very deep root of the problem. And when you resolve it at that level, it resolves in a whole different kind of way.
You've really got to fall in love with just knowing itself, wanting to know, right?
Yeah, just finding out the truth. And that's that same honesty. Like, well, if I'm just honest, well, how come I'm feeling like this? What's making this happen? Being willing to make space for the truth, to acknowledge the truth, right? And that truth will take us in all kinds of places that we don't want to go. Right? So you sit there, you're inquiring, and you're like, oh, and so I feel the anger. I recognize, oh, the anger's there because I feel weak. How come I feel so weak? I mean, I'm a grown up. Like, what's making me feel so weak? You realize, oh, well, actually, I still feel like a little kid inside. Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a discovery. So there's some little child in there that is who I still feel myself to be. And I see that person as if they're my mother. And then people are like, oh, I can't believe I've still got these mother issues. Blah, blah, blah. It's very good to understand that those structures within us are very deep. They go all the way down. You're dealing with all of the conditioning in your brain that's kind of built up since you were, before you were born. And we are little by little unraveling. You've got to make space for that. And then the transformation, the journey, the unfolding can take you deeper and deeper. And eventually it'll take you to to your nature.
And that's why we're doing it. I suppose we haven't really said that yet. That's why we're doing this. Yes. Because we are why are we doing it, Tom?
I mean, everybody has their own reason they do it.
Yeah,
actually, I think each enneatype tends to have its own motivation. Fives are investigators. They do it because they just want to know the truth, right?
Yeah,
They want to understand things. They want to investigate it all the way through. Fours are doing it because they just want to be themselves, and they feel they can't, and they just want to be themselves. Threes are doing it because they just want to express the fullness of their potential, the full accomplishment of what they are. Twos are doing it because of their love to give, right? But their love and their care, and that can make them, want to engage the journey. We could say it's just the love of the truth, but for each person, there'll be your own particular flavor of what makes you tick. Let me just ask you, why do you do it?
Why do I do it? I think the Enneagram really vivified my suffering, Dom. And then there was an equivalent vivification, if I can say that word, of being. I want to know being more deeply and not be in this. So I suppose that there is a desire to alleviate my own suffering. There is.
What makes you want to know being more?
There's an urgency. I feel it could be just as I'm getting older, like I'm approaching 40, and there's a desire to just be who I am and live from that place and offer from that place as well.
How is it to just in the moment as you recognize that?
Well, it's not here now, the self-consciousness, but that will come afterward, maybe. There's always an after the event self-consciousness.
So that's after, but how about right now as you recognize the truth now? Like, what do you feel as you see that? Oh, you just want to be who you are.
I feel full of tenderness for myself. Yeah, just bless my heart. That's how I feel. Yes,
beautiful. So when you feel that tenderness and that bless your heart, how does your heart feel? Like, what do you sense there?
I don't know, Dom. I don't know what I sense. And this is often my answer when I'm doing inquiry. I don't know exactly what I sense. There's some resting, like this is the truth. It just feels like the truth.
Okay, so you can tell that. Something in you can tell that. You can tell this is the truth. Yeah, you can tell it's the truth, and you can tell the truth has a kind of tenderness. So just notice, how can you say there's a resting. How do you feel the resting? How can you tell that?
It's like my center of gravity is low. It's just down in my body.
Okay.
So I often have the experience where in trying to describe it or articulate it, I lose it. Is that
that happens, I think, at the beginning, but you're doing really well here. So it's something about dropping, about being low, that you can tell. Right? So remember, you only ever need to be with what you can actually tell. So I said, what are you feeling in your heart? That actually wasn't a great question, right? Because that wasn't the thing that was happening for you right there, right? What was happening was more a sense of dropping, right? You can feel the realness, the kind of truth of it. Yeah. And you can tell that that's dropping and lower. What else could you say about that experience? Like, just as you notice that. Like, how does it affect you? when there's that drop in?
I don't know.
Great. I love that you can say that. Feel good, or does it feel unpleasant?
No, it feels of those two descriptors on the more pleasant side, but really just quite neutral, actually.
Yeah.
I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So it feels good, but like in a neutral kind of a way, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you see, you do know, you can tell.
Mm.
That's what you can tell about it. So here you're giving us a very good demo, like of how the inquiry actually works. So each time you're just in touch with what's actually happening, seeing what you can really say about it. That's the knack of it. And you saw how just that recognition of, why am I inquiring? What makes me do it? Oh, it's being real. It's important to be real. And that feels really true. And as that, I feel dropping in a way that feels kind of neutral but good, right? Yeah. So.
And I was, I suppose, articulating the values of my Enneagram type a little bit there. So it's 4, Dom, in case you hadn't figured that out.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah. So that seems so true, what you said, that it's so deeply a motivational map, the Enneagram, isn't it? That it's got to inform how we approach inquiry and what we go to it for. Yeah.
Absolutely. So each type kind of has its, let's say, its default urge, what we feel we're about, what it is that matters to us. And we don't have to fight that. That's the beautiful thing. Again, like in anything in inquiry, we just get to see that. That's what gets me going. For you, you describe it, you just want to be real. You want to be yourself. You want to be who you are. And that's right. That's for 4, that's what it is. That's what they're concerned with.
Oh, thanks for backing us into inquiry. I didn't get time to get too stressed about that.
Yes, we kind of snuck in.
We snuck it
into
in.
a little inquiry there.
Is there anything we shouldn't inquire into?
Lovely question. So one answer is no, right? Anything that arises in your experience is food for inquiry. You want to find out what's true about it for you. That's the truth. And in time, our inquiry will take us into the whole expanse of our inner world, which is infinitely vaster than we can even begin to imagine, right? And that's going to include everything that you can think of as good and bad. It's going to include everything from your history. It's going to include wonderful experiences and awful experiences. It's the heavens and the hells. It's the whole bang shoot. It really is everything. So good to know that. Right? That's in a sense where it can take us. I don't think it's a question of anything we shouldn't inquire into, but there are things that it's good to be, to be skillful in our inquiry and to be, if not cautious, like you don't want to be cautious, but you also don't want to be kind of reckless or pushing yourself into things that you're not ready to explore. So I would say, are there places you shouldn't go? You shouldn't don't push yourself. So like if you're inquiring and something is coming up, and it could be positive or negative, it might be a terror or it might be a feeling of love. And some part of you is like, this is too much. Like, I can't handle this right now, right? Know that you don't have to. Take the foot off the gas, climb back in the boat, go back to shore. It'll be there tomorrow for you to explore another day. You just need to be with your experience and explore it in a way that feels manageable for you. You need to know that, sometimes it'll be a stretch, but we don't have to force ourselves into something that's really, too much of a stretch. And, sometimes pockets of trauma can surface, these kind of things can come up. And then it's good to know that you can get support, whether it's therapy or anything like that, to help you really be with and digest that experience. And, in time, it can digest.
I'm recalling something from your book about trauma, which I read and agreed with, but it was, I suppose, something potentially quite controversial, Tom. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Tell me.
No, it was, people have become very quick to use that word. This is something I probably shouldn't be talking about. I don't know, but it does occur to me that maybe things are described as trauma when that's not always the case.
The key thing about it, well, let's put it this way. What can happen is we end up using the word trauma in the same way that we use our enneatype, right?
Yeah,
So we can use it to explain away our experience. Like, oh, that's my trauma, that's my enneatype, that's my amygdala, like I said earlier. And on one level, that might be an explanation, right? But from the point of inquiry, it is an experience, and it is the experience that we're interested in, right? So we need to, in time, be willing to enter into the feeling of that experience. And those vary. Sometimes people say, oh, that's my trauma, I'm getting activated, and we inquire into it, and it turns out there's anger there, or it turns out there's grief there, or, all different things can come out. From a pure inquiry point of view, it's all food for inquiry, right? And some of the experience, we need the support, and we may need extra support to be able to stay present with it. The key point is you don't inquire into anything you can't stay present with.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And really staying present, the kind of measure that we use for that really is being able to sense your arms and legs. So can you sense your arms and legs, be in touch with your body in that way, and then allow the intensity of that feeling? And if you can do that, then you can stay present with it and you can inquire, right? You can be feeling the most, devastating things, but you're sensing your arms and legs and you're present. Then you can inquire. If you generally feel you can't, it's like, if I go into that experience, I just, everything just falls apart and I'm a wreck for 2 days, right? Then it's not something that you're really ready to inquire into. And more practice of sensing your arms and legs, getting present, and maybe getting that extra support can be useful.
That's great. Very clear. How do we know that inquiry is working? It's such a type A question, but I don't care. Let's see.
It's a great question. How do we know it's working? We know it's working because we're getting in touch with ourselves, because we're getting in touch with what's true, right? That's the thing. And over time, actually, this is a more interesting question than it maybe first seems. Over time, I would say we're getting more in touch with ourselves, and we are actually beginning to understand things. Right? That's a key thing as well. Like, one of the things that makes inquiry different from, I don't know, say some of the conscious movement practices that can also get you in touch with your experience, but you don't really understand it. Whereas with inquiry, you actually have the time to explore it and articulate it and actually come to understand it. And that's what helps make us more free, right? You're more free because you recognize, oh, that's what happened to me, and that's how it impacted me and led to this, so there's an unfolding of understanding. In time, I think the other way we know our inquiry is working is because we just get more free. We become more able to allow more things, enter into more things. There is that kind of expansion of freedom that I think is one of the things. And in time, each of those specific motivations of each of the enneatypes, in time, as a 4, you probably find, I feel like I'm being more real. I'm being more myself, right? It's not always pretty, but I'm who I am, and you start to feel that, you recognize that more and more.
Do we need a teacher or a group when we begin to practice inquiry? Is that necessary?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. Do we need? I mean, I think it is immensely helpful, right? Let's say that. It is just like scuba diving. You can just go diving by yourself. Will you learn a whole lot more, get a whole lot further, probably have more fun doing it with other people, probably, right? At some point, I think it's probably true that we can only go so far by ourselves. You will at some point get to a point, where you're just so in the tangle of your ego or of your structure that you really can't, see it for yourself. And it's at moments like that, being able to go to a teacher or even just have another person being present there with you witnessing somehow or other really does have an impact. So I would say it is an enormous aid. And I don't know if I want to say absolutely yes, we have to have it, but it is for sure an enormous help. And I will also say we need to learn to inquire on our own as well. We need to learn how not to be only dependent on a teacher or a weekend or other people.
Cool. I think we've covered the terrain. Well, there's always more to cover with inquiry, and we got all the way through without you sharing your Enneagram type, Dom. So time for you to fess up. The less in their personalities people are, it becomes harder to tell, and there's no immediate reading that I have.
I think it is an interesting thing. I mean, because in my experience, what I see is that we do over time get freer and freer from the fixations of it. But the natural tendencies of it remain, like in a certain way, like Hameed is a 5, right?
Yeah.
So he's just investigating. I mean, like years into his process, he's kind of still investigating. That's just what's happening there, right? That's just what occurs in that location, even if there's nobody there doing the investigation. It's just what happens, right? It's kind of an emphasis in his experience, and I think with many people the same kind of thing. So yeah, I'm actually a 4 as well.
Oh, so, you Dom!
Yeah. I don't think it's a secret. It's not a secret. Yeah. So it's a funny story how I first came to the Enneagram. Somebody was introducing it to me, and they started one. They were just doing the self-statements. I'm right. 2, I'm helpful. 3, I'm successful. And I was sitting there going, you're not going to put me in a box. And then they said, 4, I'm special. It's like, oh, shit.
You know what? On your YouTube, one video where you share some personal stuff, like how you got into the school. And I was thinking, in terms of a series of life decisions, that did sound quite 4-y now that I reflect on it. You were in your corporate career, and then you were like, fuck this, I'm going to immerse myself in inquiry.
Yes, in spirituality and all of that. Yeah, it was rather, wasn't it?
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, let's maybe wrap up. Wrapping up is not my particular forte. Anything you want to say, Tom?
No.
Good. Okay,
I think we touched on, we did pretty well there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just thank you for the invitation. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Don't forget that if you want to get into some practice, Dominic's course starts today. Next interviewee is the very impressive Steph Barron Hall. We're going to be talking about communication.